Okie dokie. Hey, happy Tuesday. How's it going? Oh. How you doing, everybody? Hamas. Oh, wow. One of the Hamas deputy leaders got killed in a drone attack. I just saw that flash across with Al Jazeera. I'll have to look that up. Yeah, if anybody can pull up Al Jazeera, I just saw a headline flash across that says one of the deputy commanders was unalived by an Israeli drone attack. Don't know all the details, but I just saw that. Hey, everybody. Happy Tuesday to you. Somebody says in Beirut. Yeah, possibly. Don't know the details. I'm just tying my shoes real quick. Oh, boy. So, 2024 is upon us. Yeah, I just watched a video about a guy, sounds like he's British. He just was talking about his experiences visiting the West Bank. And, it's more of the same stuff that we hear from Anna Balzer, but it's just, do you have, somebody says, Sparkle says, hi Chip, hope you're well. Do you have thousands of posts to go through? Well, I don't know if you mean messages. I get a lot of messages, on a lot of different platforms. Do my best to try to answer them, or at least look at them. It just takes a long time. Anyway, but as far as posts go, I try to scan the stuff like you all do. Just go through the different social media and try to figure out what's what. But no, I don't have thousands to go through, I don't think. Anyway, it's a beautiful sunny day here. Just have to get outside with the dog here shortly. The dog. That's Ruby the dog. Somebody says their parents went to the West Bank last week. Oh, well, I hope they're safe. I know the Israeli settlers have been talked about that yesterday in my New Year's wish. Just can't believe how much the settlers are doing in the West Bank. It's disgusting. Anyway, it is what it is. Yeah, I don't know how much, like I said, that's a very good point. I don't know how much longer that there's going to be a presence in the West Bank. The Israelis seem hell-bent on what they're doing. So, anyway, thank you for the cute, her name's Ruby. She's 4 years old. She's what they call a coonhound. And, I like to say dogs are everything that's right with the world. A lot of bad things, but thankfully dogs aren't one of them. Thank goodness. I'm just going to grab a glass of water while people filter in. So I was on a panel yesterday. I don't know if anybody saw it, but some people did. And because I think when I go live on someone else's live, that it gives people a message, just like the happening here. So here I was on somebody else's live. They were talking about what's happening with Donald Trump and the fact that for those of you who don't know, in the United States, we have, for our federal elections for president, it's 50 separate state races. Each state has their own race. So the state of Maine and the state of Colorado recently both interpreted the charges that have been brought up against President Trump for, quote unquote, inciting insurrection as being sufficient to exclude him from the primary ballot in those states. So my point to them was this, again, I'm not a legal scholar. My father was a lawyer, my grandfather was a judge, but it doesn't mean anything, I guess. But my sense is that the what he actually said, it wasn't great what he said. It probably could have been worded better. He could have said, listen, don't make sure you're not violent. He could have gone out of his way to tell people, but he said what he said. He's like, go down there and give them hell, basically. Go down there and give them hell. Let them know that you have the power, or whatever the hell. He didn't say, go down there, break into the Capitol, stop the election. He didn't say that, right? You can infer from what he said that that's what he meant, but I don't think that's the case either. I don't think he meant that. But who knows? But anyway, the point is, what's already happened, I saw it today on the news, the Trump legal team has appealed those rulings, which is what I figured, of course. Why wouldn't you? But they're going to go to the appellate courts in those states. They're going to be overturned. 99% chance. Yeah, I heard Israel just attacked Beirut, which is the capital of Lebanon, and there was a drone attack that unalived a senior Hamas deputy commander or something like that. So yeah, I agree. Listen, I am not a Trump supporter. I want to make that very clear to who's. This is not, and that's what they accuse me of defending Trump. Like I was a MAGA person. I'm like, you have no idea how far I am from being a MAGA person. I mean, that's just not me. But they all say, well, you sound like a Trump supporter. I'm like, listen, it's not about the person. It's about the principle involved. So I don't care if it was Daffy Duck that was having that happen to them. It's not right to tell somebody they can't. Listen, I think, you know me, I think voting is kind of a, it's a charade. It's like a pageant. It doesn't really affect too much. But even so, I mean, it's all part of the constitutional framework that we're supposed to protect, right? The whole thing's been so co-opted. It's bad enough, but then you start taking candidates who you don't like and tell them they can't run. I mean, it's just, all like I said, all the presidency does is decide who gets to direct the bribery system for the most amount of time for 4 years. But either way, so I think it's a bad precedent to set, under anybody. I don't think anybody should be restricted. In fact, I think voting should be a holiday, a national holiday, so that everybody can have the day off and vote. That sounds like much more. I mean, other countries do that, right? But in our country, they have it on a Tuesday when most people who work for a living have to make a tough choice. Do I go to work or do I vote? Or some people vote absentee, which is basically a mail-in ballot. Do I think it'd be possible to redirect from two parties? No. The electoral system, based on my analysis, again, it's an opinion, is beyond repair at this point. It can't be reformed from within because it is wholly owned and operated by others, such that no matter who goes into the system, there's not enough power in an individual or a small group to make a change. I've even said if you replaced all 535 reps and senators with brand new people tomorrow morning, just snap your fingers, all the old dogs are gone, all the new people come in, same problem. Because the same incentives and penalties are in place based on the power structures, as well as the influence from within, the permanent security state. All those influences haven't changed. You have to change the things influencing the process and the laws that allow those influences to occur. We have corporate personhood, which is a terrible thing, and then we have money is free speech. It's a First Amendment protected form of speech now, and that's constitutionally enshrined, so there has to be a constitutional amendment to undo those things. That's not going to happen because there's only two ways to get a constitutional amendment. And I'm not saying this to discourage you. I'm just telling you this is what we're up against, we being the people that would like to see these changes. There's two ways to get a constitutional amendment. It's got to be 2/3 of the Congress ratified by the president, or it's going to have to be 3/4 of the state houses to vote in favor of it. Now, there's enough money swirling around that there's no way you can get a 2/3 vote on anything that's contrary to corporate power. You can't even get it out of committee. And there's no way you can get the state houses because they're just as co-opted in many cases as the federal officials. So they've got the whole thing locked up with a nice little red bow around it. And they're like, isn't life swell? And they got people fighting with each other. This is the other part. Like yesterday on that panel, they have people thinking that quote unquote, half the country's wrong and half the country's right. So therefore, the people aren't going to come together because who wants to lock arms with a MAGA supporter and who wants to be with this liberal woke idiot, right? That's the thought from either side. And therefore, they're fighting. And who's going to be able to take on the power structure when they're fighting amongst each other, right? It's divide and conquer. It's worked out very well for the power structure. Somebody's asking if it's possible to get away from trickle-down economics. Well, that's assuming that trickle-down economics is trickling down. I think that's just a thought. No, I don't think it trickles down, at least not very much. So no. Well, yes, so people say, so where can we start? A lot of us are talking about that. Online, if you follow a lot of the videos, you're seeing the undertow. I saw a video today. There was something like 10,000 cars and trucks that had mobilized in support of Palestinians that were just completely clogging up the area where they were. I hate to say it. I don't want to have to be a nuisance, or no one wants to be a nuisance to others, right? But unfortunately, disruption is what leads to change. It doesn't happen by accident. So the idea is, what are the first steps? It's okay. I say this over and over again. For those of you who've heard it, I apologize because it gets old hearing somebody say the same thing. But for those of you who haven't heard this, so if you're working in a company and the company's not being fair with how they're paying the workers, or they're not giving you vacation time, or they're making you work overtime, or whatever the case may be, whatever the grievances are, and you want to have a set of desired different outcomes, better outcomes for the workers. Well, what do the workers do? First, they ask. You can go in one-on-one with your boss and say, hey boss, can I get some more pay? Can I get better vacation? He's going to say, sorry, the company won't allow it. I wish I could, but I can't, right? Okay, so then somebody comes around when enough of that happens, and we're getting nowhere. So then somebody comes along and says, "Hey, would you like to join a union?" Right? If we organize, one stick or two sticks can be broken really easily, but if you put together 100 sticks, there's no way you can break that, right? So that's what a union is. A union is nothing more than creating a power system that collectivizes the power instead of individualizes power, right? So what does a union do? Well, a union has a rep or a series of reps that negotiate with management, and they try to ask or say, hey, we want to change this to this, and this is why we think and they go back and forth, and that's the negotiation part. Well, our negotiations have obviously failed, right? We're trying to call our senators and congressmen, and it goes nowhere, right? Let's be honest. You can write a letter, you can stand and protest outside the right, you can try to shame them. Nothing changes, right? Unfortunately. So what does a union do? A union says to the company, hey, listen, boss, if you're not willing to give anything, we're going to do what we have to do to try to force you to give us something, right? That's called going on strike or threat of going on strike. So there's 3 tools that the public has. Remember, you have your purchasing power. We have our purchasing power. We have our labor, and we have many more of us than there are of the management class. So it's numbers, labor, and buying power. 3/4 of the economy is consumption by the public. So it just can't go forward. If people aren't buying anything other than essentials, the economy is not going to go forward. But how do you get a lot of people to participate, right? This is the challenge. So just like when you're organizing a union, the union doesn't come to be. It doesn't just magically pop up one day. There's union organizing that goes on. So it takes time. You go talk to workers face to face, break room to break room. Hey, are you pissed off about this? Yes. Are you pissed off about this? Yes. Would you like to find a way to fix it? Yes. You don't ask them, do you vote for Trump? Do you vote for Biden? Do you support transgender rights? Do you support gun? They don't have that conversation. They focus on the common goal of everybody that has the same interest, right? And then you say, okay, sign up for the union. Now, what does the union do? The union protects your interest, advocates for your interests. However, they have to have some funds with which to do that, to hire the people to do it. And they also have to have some funds put aside for the rainy day in case the strike ever happens. It's called the union fund. And what happens is there are going to be people that are doing better or worse than other people who work in the union, right? Some are more lower paid. Some people have 5 kids, whatever the case may be. So if you're going to strike, you can't go on strike if your whole life's going to fall apart, right? You're not going to take that risk. But if the union fund will help you get through it, then you're more willing to participate, right? I think that makes common sense. So take that same line of thinking, but instead of the company, replace that with the power structure that's preventing these changes to occur through the typical system. And instead of the company workers, look at it as the entire working class of the United States. So just take the whole thing and blow it up, right? Bigger. So the management who you're trying to negotiate with are the people that are holding the power, the wealthy class, the interest groups like AIPAC, the different industry groups, the national security establishment, all the things that we're seeing that control these processes that we want to see done differently. And then what do we have to do then? Well, what did they have to do to create the union? Had to go organize, right? What do those conversations look like? Hey, John, are you sick of crony capitalism? Yeah. Are you tired of all this money being spent outside the country and not helping out people at home? Yeah. Do you think that we should have some form of health care that doesn't bankrupt us from, when we have a family member get sick, or doesn't take all this money out of our check, which is like $1,500 a month or whatever it is? Yeah. So you find 2 or 3 major issues that everyone can agree upon. 99.9% of people want these things, except for the 1%, right? And you stick to those initially. Just say, okay, let's put aside, listen, you like gun rights, I support transgender rights. Let's put that aside for a second. I know we disagree vehemently. Okay, but we both agree on these 2 or 3 things. Great. Now we have togetherness. Then you organize that writ large in a decentralized fashion. So there's not one leader. You have 30,000 union leaders that are spread across every community. You build coalitions with other like-minded groups. So you might have other groups that are already formed for other issues like Birdwatchers Club, of whatever the case. You get the idea. And then you work together to bring them into this commonality. And the framework has to be the framework has to be a blueprint towards success. For example, you have strategy, you have tactics, and then you have execution of strategy and tactics, but it's escalatory. Meaning that you don't go out day one and threaten to strike and be like, you're on the, no. You basically have to get together and tell them, hey, listen, this is what we're willing to do, but we want these changes to come about because this is what's best for society going on. We're not doing this because we're selfish. We want our kids to have a better life. We think that the situation is out of balance. We need to have better outcomes for more people. So what do you do then? You first ask nicely, then you point out the issues that you want to do it through the legitimate process, but the fact that the political process with money is speech and Citizens United and corporate personhood and the donor class, it has blocked the ability of the process to work for the people who are electing the officials, and they're serving someone else, right? That's what's happening. So you point that out and you say this needs to change, and you ask nicely. Of course, they're going to say no, go to hell. And by the way, I see the person in the guest box. I'll get to you in a sec. So you do that, right? And then they're going to tell you to go pound sand. You're like, okay. So then you have other tactics. You might start with smaller, more regional protests, where you have a tactic of maybe stopping a beltway in a city. And you point to that and say, listen, you saw that. That was a pain in the ass. That whole city shut down for 6 hours. That was bad for Philadelphia, for example, right? And you say, listen, we don't want to do this, but we are willing to do this. That might be a couple workers walking off the job for a week in maybe a key position that makes the company difficult to operate in some form. And it's a show of force, basically. It's a show of power to say, hey, listen, dude, look at this. This is something that we can bring to bear, but we don't want to do it. We'd rather just have a nice way of resolving our differences. But again, you're probably going to get the same message. You'll probably get some kind of crackdown, right? People get arrested or worse, who knows, right? That's called the response from the establishment. And sometimes the response from the establishment can be your best friend, because people that were otherwise unwilling to organize with you see that on TV and be like, damn. Somebody says, cheer up, Chip, smile like you mean it. I don't know what that means. Anybody who follows me, I'm more professorial. I'm not a comedian like Quinn. Just my style. So if you're getting the idea here, the idea is you have escalatory tactics. This is all agreed upon and written out ahead of time, so that no matter who's involved, you have the same set of steps and the same set of desired outcomes. There's not like one learning there. Let me see here. I got somebody here. Just a second. Get this person out of here. All right. So that's how it has to be. And that way there's no one leader or no group. It's just very flat. It's a peer-to-peer system, not a hierarchy. And then what you do is you go through that process and you ask, and then if it doesn't happen, you keep moving up, and eventually you have enough going on that it's debilitating to the whole system. If you have every beltway, every roadway, every port, every airport, every bridge, every railway, if the whole system is clogged up to a point where the wheels of commerce don't turn, in other words, that's like the strike slowing the company down. It would include things like a general strike, like people not going to work at all their places. They would not buy stuff other than essentials. The mutual aid would be money raised like a union fund that would allow people who are struggling to get through the process while it works out. Now, again, none of this may work, right? There may be responses to this that are so harsh that people back down and they don't participate, right? It could happen. So, it's not about cleaning office. It's not about changing the political leaders. It's not going to matter. Like I said, think of the establishment right now. The system that functions right now is a big quicksand, like a muddy pit of quicksand that when people go into, they fall into it and they just can't get out. And so you can vote for the person in the beige jumpsuit or the white jumpsuit or even the lavender jumpsuit, third party. Pick your poison. They all go in, and what happens? They get stuck. They get muddy. So you can take everybody out right now, reuniform a whole different group of people, throw them in the same, and what's going to happen? They're all going to get stuck. They're all going to get muddy, right? Because it's the quicksand that has to go, not the people coming in and out of it, right? So that's what you have to think about. And listen, is it unfortunate that that's where things are? Yeah, it sucks. And is it unfortunate that the traditional political process that would be far easier and far less painful and far less work would allow us to vote in better people, and they would somehow work things out, right? That'd be great. But unfortunately, that option isn't available to us anymore. I mean, we've been trying it now I've been watching it happen for 4 or 5 decades, right? I'm 56 years old. Doesn't change anything. It changes certain things. Women's reproductive rights. I'm not trying to marginalize women who care about that issue. It's a really important issue. Some of the social issues get adjudicated, but most of the core power issues like money, tax reform, foreign policy, American imperialism, militarism, all the things that are not so great for the domestic population, those things have gone unabated and they've increased. It's like an out of control monster that keeps growing. And look at the deficit spending, right? Our debt is close to $34 trillion. It's insane. And with no end in sight. So it's not looking good. And, quite frankly, and I don't mean to be Debbie Downer, but the chance of any of these things even occurring is very low. And it's not because people are bad people. It's just because it's human nature to not want to take a risk when your life is not horrific. The thought of leaving your family in the lurch and taking a risk that could get you arrested or worse, and leaving your family in the lurch, as long as if there's money you think might be available to you, it's just a big step to take, right? It's a big risk. It's a big change. So I don't believe, because of what I've seen happening in the United States since I've been alive and what I've seen happen in places like Europe, which is a different approach to trying to affect change, that the Americans have it in them to want to take on something like this. And I hope to God I'm wrong about that. But, and there are people that are. Like, you can see what I talked about this morning. There was a video of 10,000 vehicles down in Texas somewhere. I don't know exactly where. That's the type of organizing that needs to happen. You need to have solidarity among people. And you have to, like Jimmy Dore says, you don't know who Jimmy Dore is? He's a political comedian that has a YouTube show, Jimmy Dore, D-O-R-E. He says, listen, your enemy is not your neighbor who believes in MAGA. And your enemy is not your neighbor who has blue hair and believes in transgender rights. They're not your enemy. They're just somebody you're arguing with on some issues that you may have a different point of view on, which is fine. But the power centers are above you, and you're below them, us. They're not left or right. So when you watch Fox News and you're like, yeah, and you watch MSNBC and you're like, yeah, you're being duped. That is all purposeful echo chamber confirmation bias bullshit, which means you hear more of what you want to hear that makes you feel better about your point of view. And meanwhile, all the really important issues are being obfuscated purposely such that you don't focus on them. You focus more on the other stuff, because it's like walking into a party and going into a circle of people and say something political like, abortion really should be outlawed. And then you walk away and everybody starts arguing about the bullshit. That's what the establishment has basically done to the public. They've entered our sphere, stirred some shit up, and walked away like, hey, look, let them fight. Isn't this great? So that is where things are. I mean, people can argue otherwise. I will defend that position until, I'm blue in the face. But, if somebody has evidence that points in a different direction, I'm happy to hear it. I'd like to listen. I would love it if we could affect change through voting. Now, what gets somebody to take action and to be a part of the union when, they otherwise wouldn't? Well, when your pay gets so low that you just can't see any other way to get by, you join the union because you're like, these people are screwing me. And just like that, people, when their lives are going well enough and they're not feeling desperation, probably a lot of them aren't going to be a part of it, right? Think about it. People have to have a reason to do something, right? They have to be feeling some pain, because we do more to avoid pain than we do to pursue pleasure. It's a human response. If your hand's on the stove and the stove is burning, that hand's coming off real quick, right? But so the point is, it's not unexpected for people not to want to get involved initially. It's expected. The other thing you'll learn, if you've done any political organizing, is that people will say one thing, but when it comes time to actually do something, very few actually do. And in my understanding over the years, it's been about 3%. So you can rely on 3% who say they're going to do something to do something, which I know is also very discouraging, right? You're like, damn. So you have to create these ideas. You have to map them out. You have to create a decentralized movement. You have to have organizing going on. And 97% of people who say they'll do something won't, right? So now those are high odds against something happening, right? That's why I'm telling you all that. It's not because I don't want it to happen. So it is what it is. And now listen, you can put your head in the sand, in which case you're going to get your ass kicked, which is what a lot of people are doing. They feel this sense of helplessness. Like, what are you going to do? And by the way, I don't vote in federal elections, not because I don't think voting is completely a bad thing, but I just don't think it's like recycling is to solving ecological problems. We have this massive industrial system that's grinding through nature at record rate while we have 8 billion plus people and counting. Recycling is good to do, but it ain't going to solve the ecological problems, right? It's not going to make much of a difference. It's on the margins. So is voting. Voting is on the margins. So, again, and by the way, America, the United States is probably the biggest part of this problem. The United States policy drives most of the problems throughout the world. So if there could be a change in the U.S., I mean, obviously it would affect issues like the one we're watching right now in Palestine. It's the problem is the U.S. political system is so owned and bought and paid for by special interests that they just can't make a decision to go up against something which is morally wrong, like what we're seeing here. So, morality, unfortunately, this is where politics is a mess. Morality rarely comes into play. It's like the fifth or sixth decision down the ladder. People will bark about it and complain about it, but in actions is what means something, right? Words don't mean shit. So anyway, to set that happy tone for the day. No, listen, it's just, this is, I have friends who I've worked with politically on campaigns who disagree with me, and they think there's still a great chance for different people to come in and make a difference. And it could be, I could be wrong, and I would love to be proven wrong about that. But the problem is with corporations, and they only have to control the party leadership, because the party leadership controls who gets money for re-election through these different committees and PACs that money comes in. And if you're not raising money well, and you're not somebody who, if you're someone speaking out against the quote unquote party line, which is where that comes from, the party line, you're not going to get the money. And in 98% of the races, the person who spends the most money wins the race. So if you're a young congresswoman or a young senator, you're going to figure out really quickly what you have to do to survive. And if you're a politician, if you are worried about your career more than you're worried about the public, which seems like what most people are, you have to survive. So you're going to do what's required to survive, which means you're going to have to play into the quicksand and not refuse to get into it in the first place, right? Somebody says there's a way to target funding for Secret Service. Well, I mean, listen, those are all things that are allocated through the budgeting process, and that stuff is permanently established. You couldn't do anything at all to stop that from happening. And even if you did, if you just cut funding for Secret Service, that wouldn't make a difference. It would just, they'd find some other way to fund or to protect the president or whomever needs protection. All right, I Am Palestinian has been waiting patiently, just reminding me. Thank you for reminding me. And then we have Savannah HD. And while they're talking, I'm going to mute the phone because I have not eaten. I fasted today until noon, so I need.
Hey, Chip, my friend, how are you?
Good.
Good to see you. So I just want to add a few things on top of what you just described,
Okay.
but I also want to explain some of the stuff. Man, I've been thinking a lot about this, and let me give you a small understanding. So we were born in a country that was torn apart because of war, and then it was communist and stuff like that, right? And then I wasn't that old, and we moved to Scandinavia now, and then I'm living here in America past about 13 years. So English is not my mother tongue, so excuse me if some of the part I use the wrong word and stuff like that, and you're more than welcome to correct me. However, so we were used to propaganda. So when you're used to propaganda and you question, then you start questioning almost everything as if you're paranoid, right? But you're not. So when we moved to Scandinavia, it's just balanced. So there's a propaganda, but there's also some rationality and logic. So that's good. Now when I moved to America, I'm like, shoot, I've heard this. I know this is pure propaganda. Maybe not the whole thing, but majority is, right? So here's a problem, Chip. The establishment has been so deep into, for the past decades or century, that our retirements, and I've mentioned this before, our retirement, our 401k, tons of other things that down the road when we were 60s and our 70s or whatever, once we want to retire, it's actually vested in those companies that we try to fight against. So that's the thing that, like the movie Matrix, you become part of the system and then you start defending it, right? So it's like from one end, we're trying to get rid of this establishment. On the other end, we're feeding actually into the establishment, right? By our paychecks, whatever. So that's all like, how can we do? Like just, for example, Google. I'm pretty sure Google is into tons of other nonsense that helps government with whatever, however they're collecting data and feeding, right? So this is very complicated, Chip. You're mute. So you go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. It's probably the equivalent of trying to climb Mount Everest 10 times in 10 days. It's just there's so many things that are up against the public in terms of the power structures. And you said, listen, investments are a fancy word for destroying nature to make money. Let's face it.
Yeah. So imagine that many decades ago, like 50s and 40s or whatever, people used to save money so they could use it in future. Today, people want to get rid of money. Why? Because the way they have structured the system, because the evaluation of the money. So no, don't hold on money. Invest your money. And where the money goes, where the investment, again, and the same system. So we are like brainwashed, like don't hold money, no good, no good. So imagine where we have gone from like a single income could run a family, right? A plumber in 60s could have 3 kids, car and house, and wife could be home. Today we have 2 income, we're still struggling, right?
Yeah.
And imagine on top of, okay, we have to step away in order to fight the system. My friend, I mean, when I'm sitting there with my own thoughts, it's just like, okay, how deep can I go? And then you pull yourself out, and I'm like, shoot, this thing is so, I don't know, so complicated.
Yeah, it's discouraging, but here's the thing. Chris Hedges, who's a very well-known intellectual and author who, if you don't know, teaches also inside of a New Jersey prison to try to help inmates and better their lives. He's just a great person. He says, listen, there's a good chance that the establishment is going to win, and there's nothing's going to change what we're seeing. But what are we going to say to our kids if we don't try?
Correct.
Right? We have to try to do what we can do. So along those lines, it makes sense to give whatever we can a try. So like I said, it's going to require a lot of work. So right now we're very used to having a certain way of living. I'm speaking for myself and maybe others who I know, but I can't speak for everybody. But the typical life is you go to work, you get off work, you probably either exercise before or after work if you do that kind of stuff, or you spend some time with your kids, you maybe watch some TV together, you maybe watch some Netflix, get
Sure.
up and do it again. On the weekends, you make some trips. Once a year, you take a vacation for a week or two and repeat, rinse, repeat. That's kind of the typical American lifestyle.
Sure.
That's all going to have to change. That rhythm that we're used to, that we're comfortable with, and that's hard in and of itself. Some people are now working 2 jobs and spending less time with their kids, or they're not watching any Netflix, and they're just trying to scrape by because of inflation, right? And like you said, the amount of work that you have to do to maintain your lifestyle is much greater than it used to be because you have to have 2 working people, and even then it's hard to get by. So everything's pitted against the working class, and that's because it's been a very concerted effort for money to move from the lower and middle stratas of society up to the top, and it's worked marvelously. But the problem is, like any other society, when it gets that top heavy, people start to revolt eventually. They can't take it anymore, and that's when people are angry, but they need a place to direct their energy. Things like TikTok and other social media platforms are how people are going to communicate along these levels. So I think their days are probably numbered in terms of censorship and limiting the reach of people to each other, because it's an amazing tool that people can use to form these peer-to-peer systems I was talking about. So there's actually I just saw a video about it today. There's been a provision put into the Defense Authorization Act. If you don't know what that is, that's the money that goes to the United States spends on its military every year, which always gets passed, it always goes up, to ban TikTok, to
Whoa.
make it illegal for TikTok app to be available in the United States of America, in U.S. territories. So that's in there right now. Now, does it get stripped out before the bill gets voted on? I don't know. I hope so. If enough of us call Congress and say, hey, Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, put it into the bill.
Okay. I know, but going back to what I said, so I mean, I remember one time you mentioned that you have MBA or something like that, right? You're within. Okay, so you know the investment and stuff like that. I mean, you have some understanding of all of that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, how can I say, okay, I don't want to feed anything into the establishment, but I have to do some investment. So it's hardship. So do I have to go there selectively, do my due diligence and do some research? Okay, am I going to put money on this company or that company because they're part of this and that? It's not going to be easy, Chip.
Well, listen, I totally agree. And if you take things a step further, which is really kind of a gut punch, if you're someone who cares about the environment, or you want to see the things like water and air be cleaner for your kids, or you want to have climate change not completely destroy the fabric of life for your children and grandchildren, it gets even harder. I mean, try to buy only locally produced stuff, which reduces the miles at which it's produced at. It's hard to be virtuous, let's put it that way. So that's a very general statement to say. So if you're buying index funds like the S&P 500 or the Vanguard, whatever it is, you're participating in the establishment business practice, even though
Exactly.
you've been told your whole life that in order to have a retirement, you have to invest, right? Invest sounds like this inanimate thing that you're doing to kind of make your life better in the future. You're a participant in the destructive militarism, imperialism, corporate structure that's basically screwing everybody. You're a participant as a beneficiary in that process.
Correct. On the other end, I'm mad at them at the same time, right? So how can we get ourselves out of this? I swear to God, it's not easy, Chip. It's a very, very I think the road is very long for us
Yeah,
to.
it's tough. And by the way, the time frame within which we have to operate could be quite limited. There's a lot of people talking about things like central bank digital currencies and biometrics and 15-minute cities or Project 2025, Project 2030, these kind of things. So who knows what the future has in store, but there may be things brought to bear that make the slog that we're talking about even more difficult. And that sounds crazy because we've already outlined how challenging it is. So again, we have a lot of things to be thankful for day in, day out. The sun does shine, right? We can breathe clean air. We have some freedom of movement. We have things we can do that help others and create good in the world. So those are all good things we have. The bigger issues, they may be outside our individual control. So collectively working is probably the only way to affect them. That may not even be enough, but we have to at least try to give something a go. That's the point. That's where I come from on it.
Correct. And the last thing, if people can work on some sort of framework where they say, okay, you need to support your, like you said, your local more than your, so that way, if at least there's some minimum framework out there so people can start using them and start work, with them, then, slowly we can expand it to over other areas of the society and stuff like that. That would be also a good way to start. So, all right,
Yeah.
man. Good talking to you.
You as well. Take care. Thanks for coming on.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, not the greatest of situations, right? So the deck is stacked against the working and the lower classes in our country. It has been for some time. It's continuing to be so. But if you grew up, I'm 56. I grew up in the 70s. That was my first years that I really remember all that well, being like a 7-year-old kid on up. All of the commerce was different back then. We had a lot of locally owned stores, a lot of localized businesses that have since been pushed out by these larger corporate chains. So every time you or I go to a corporate chain and spend $1, whether it's online or locally, we're funneling money, knowingly or otherwise, to a very small subset of the ownership class who own the shares predominantly in these publicly traded corporations. Now, as I Am Palestine said, some of us own those shares too in our retirement accounts. So we get some of the crumbs that come off of that. But the people that are eating the large pieces of cake and the cookies, they're the people of the 1%. They have all the shares. They have like 75 or 80% of all the shares in those companies. And the other 20% is distributed across the lower people. So when you go to buy something from Home Depot, which I've done, or if you buy something from Amazon.com, which I've done, or if you go to a corporate-owned grocery store like Kroger, which I've not done, but you get the idea, that money doesn't stay in the community. That money goes to Wall Street, which then goes in the form of dividends or stock appreciation to the wealthiest people in the world. So what we're going to have to do is to stop doing that, to unwind that, to relocalize our communities, our economies, and starve that beast. And it's going to take work to get everybody in your community to agree on that, right? Some people are just going to have their head in the sand or in the clouds and not have any clue about this, right? Or they just want convenience. And by the way, that is very inconvenient to do. Try finding something that's locally made, that's locally owned store. It's tough, right? Because everything's been globalized with Chinese production and large corporate stores. So they've made it much more difficult for us. And plus, it's cheaper in many cases, right? Somebody just said their prices are cheaper. Walmart, good point. So you're like, well, hey, man, I'm already working these 2 jobs. I can barely afford to buy food. You're telling me I have to go buy this product that's $10 less at Walmart from Joe? No way. I get it. But if that's the road ahead for your kids to have a life, the more we temporarily plug into what's cheaper and more convenient, which does make sense in terms of your own budgeting, it leaves everyone else in a worse place than a better place. That is what it is. So again, a lot of unpleasant realities, a lot of bitter pills to swallow, right? Yeah. Savannah, someone else drop. Let Savannah come up and see what Savannah has to say.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hey.
Well, I'm right along with you on all of this. I've been thinking more about, real change and how we can make this happen. Doing this movement to try to get people to start voting local and state and making sure that they, push for the right candidates. That's great and all. But unfortunately, I've been increasingly becoming less optimistic about it. which I used to be always optimistic, but I think it's listening to you and also a few other people, and then going back and looking at history and seeing how it all worked out in the past and how people have tried to do that and it did not work. And like you said, they can make a promise to you and then they go in and then again, they're back in the muddy waters. And so the muddy waters is what needs to change. Not in the sense of this, what is it? What did Trump coin? The flush the swamp or something like that?
Drain the swamp.
Drain the swamp, because his idea of draining the swamp is not what we're actually talking about. He would have preserved the corporations are people. Where we know that corporations are people is actually going against our, best interest. One of the things that I brought up is that we need to form a super PAC, and how to do that. For us to have a super PAC and put all of our funding and money into one thing, it means that a huge group of people have to be able to give up their moment's satisfaction for the lifelong dream. Not just their own lifelong dream, but they have to see the future of their children being more important than what they have today. That's a sacrifice that many people aren't willing to make. I mean, we've seen that the generations before us sat there and put their heads in the sand and didn't care because they were living a good economic life at the time, fair life, and they just overlooked all the things that were happening around them politically. Most people that I grew up around when I came into America, the first thing they would say is, I'm not political. And I'm like, well, that's too bad, because politics is about you. Your money is politics. Everything that you do is political, whether you realize it or not. And I think I abhor the idea that people say, I'm not political. I'm sorry. I don't want to know anything about that. And they brush off politics because they're not interested in it. I don't think that it's not that they're interested in it. I believe that they're actually fearful of what they don't understand. And because it's become so complicated to them and they don't get it, they just want to rely and trust this person that they elected to go and do the work. And if that person they elected says, oh, it wasn't me, I wasn't the bad guy, although they may have been, they can easily just point on the other side of the aisle and say, they did it. It was their fault. We had no choice. And we see this on both sides of the aisle. They do this on a regular basis. Another thing that we can do, aside from creating a super fat PAC, is also sue. Someone asked me, who is sue? But what I meant was, we need to start taking the violations of our own states, that when they violate our own rights in our own state, we need to take it serious. And not many are willing to do that. We have to find a group of attorneys that are different, that are willing to stand up against the establishment, no matter what the cost is. Sorry. And the reason I said that, for example, one of the states ended up giving away people's employees' pensions. They took from the employees' pensions in the state and sent it to Israel, for example. That's a crime within itself. But nobody's going to stand up for it. Nobody's going to say and fight against it. Like, hey, what you just did was a violation of my rights. That's our employee pension. You can't do that. They're not going to fight to say you cannot use funds that are already allocated for us, for the people that we've been paying into. You can't do that. And that's what we need. We need more people that are willing to take that deep dive and say, let's go after these establishments, even on the local level, and let's show them that we're not bowing to them. And you made a great point that, for example, we need to bankrupt that establishment. We need to hit the belly of the beast where it hurts, and it's money. It's all about funding. Of course, we know the banking system is also part of the corruption. We know that there's so many different areas that we have to tackle here. And so we have to bring the greatest minds together to awaken. And I mean, when the masses of people are agreeing, it's fine. But when you don't have the right people in the right places, like Chip running for, I don't know, governor, then state representative, then Senate, maybe, because Chip, everybody agrees, has a lot of knowledge, knows what he wants, and he seems like the person that would sacrifice that moment's satisfaction, wouldn't get muddied in the water. That's the type of people we need. But how do we get those people? And that's where my ideas about the presidential election or all the elections has completely changed. Went from very, very optimistic to not negative, but more realistic, till it's scary, because I like to have an idealistic mind. I'm always the one that's like, but listen, guys, we can do it. But lately I've been thinking realistically, can we? how do we find, and I want to say create, but not really create, find, develop, and bring up and support and back the right candidate. It has to be from the bottom up. That is what APAC and the rest of them do. They find people at the bottom that they end up developing. They school them, they bring them into their conferences, they surround them with their information that they want them to know. They fund them. They back them 100%. And then next thing you know, within 10 years, that person is in the Senate and they're the ones holding it down. Those are the people that we hear the voices of. They could be a nobody. We need to counteract that by doing the same exact thing. We need to find people that are at the bottom right now who have those qualifications, and we can build them up, back them, fund them, do whatever it takes to push them up. And that's where I say we need to have a super PAC for the people.
Let
Hey,
me jump in and so we talked about a second ago. You brought up some great points, by the way. Thank you for your points. So you talked about the boomers. Basically, that's what people are pointing to. The boomers had a great life, so to speak, but why didn't they see this coming? I don't blame the boomers, even though I know they've had a great life and they could have done more. And here's why. We're having these conversations right now because we're feeling the changes in our lives happening in real time. So we're responding to those changes, the perceived pain or pain itself of having to work more, or seeing these things like what's happening in Gaza, like just emotional things that stir our emotions. They didn't have that. They didn't have something to prompt them to push back against. So they pretty much just went about and did what they did. So I think many of us may be the same way. A lot of us haven't been active on this issue until after October 7th, right? Because it was thrust into our orbit. And only when things are thrust sort of, very aggressively into our orbit, or we feel pain, do we respond to something emotionally. So that's that issue. As far as the super PAC is concerned, not a bad idea. None of the ideas, whether it's voting, starting a super PAC, all those things. I'll give you a couple examples of where I think it's going to run into some trouble. So we had an establishment creature who'd already have a lot of experience within the Senate named Bernie Sanders. And when he tried to run for the Democratic nominee for the presidential election, he got absolutely crushed by the establishment. They made sure that no matter what, he could not get the nomination. They wanted an establishment person like Hillary Clinton to run. So the two-party structure right now, as far as the party leadership is concerned, which is really where things emanate from, even if you got good people, let's say you voted for me and you think I have the right mindset and I have the right aptitude to go into this system and try to make change happen, I'm going to get crushed. First of all, I would not be allowed to run. Let's face it. A guy like me is the last person they want to have run. But even if I did somehow make it through the process, not having been pre-selected by the establishment, I'm going to come into a buzzsaw that is big party politics. They're going to starve me of funding. They're going to run somebody against me. APAC certainly would, given my views. People like me, men and women like us who care, who are well-minded people that want to help the constituents, get destroyed in a system that does not serve constituents. Therefore, it destroys those who want to. That's the problem. I don't think any amount of money in a super PAC or any amount of great people who come in, I talk about the jumpsuits, beige, white or lavender, they're all going to get stuck in this bad system of muddy quicksand. So I don't think that's the route. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I think you can take all 435 representatives out, all 100 senators, throw them out the door right now, replace them with other people that are all like me, and we don't have to fight. They're still going to get pushed down by the establishment. They would do whatever they had to make the party leadership play ball. It's just the way it is. It's the incentives and the punishments that have to change for the people in the systems to change. And they would. But right now, the incentives are such that they cannot survive if they don't play into the game that's put out in front of them. And it's not their fault. Even some of them who may take corporate money and don't think of themselves as bought out, they come into a system where they have no choice but to be, or they don't survive. That's the problem. So getting money out of politics is a huge one. Getting rid of corporations having personhood, that's a huge one. That could change the playing field. That's part of the problem, but you still have high net worth donors and super PACs. They'll still donate some money. Everyone's going to bribe people. That happens in systems where you remove the legalized bribery. People go to the illegal bribery. It's always been the case. So, but those would be two huge steps that could make a big difference potentially, right? But again, everything's become so politicized and controlled by big money. And then you have the permanent national security state. as far as this militarism and war machine, and then forcing the Congress people to put money into it over and above helping the people. I mean, it's a bad self-reinforcing cycle that we have in place that has to be completely broken. So we have to remove a lot of people that are not going to stop doing this one way or the other, where it's imprisonment, some sort of laws that will put jail time in. It's not going to be easy to get done because the same people who would make those laws are the same people controlling the process in which the laws get made.
Right. And I agree with that. I feel like we need to hit this from every multi-level, but also multi-angle. It
Yeah.
needs to be a not community action, but a national action. It's not even almost, what is the right word? We are in a crisis. We are in a crisis of times. We're in a political crisis,
Yeah.
far larger than people even seem. We're talking about these things and relating it to just certain events happening right now. But if we continue on the path that we are on right now, greater empires have fallen. And it's very important that we stand up now so that we can preserve the democracy that we were supposed to have, that was promised to us.
Yeah.
I look at the corporations of people, even from the beginning, I've always thought, hold on, well, that's kind of strange. Isn't that like replacing me as an individual? Doesn't that replace me as a citizen? How do you compare, or how do you say that corporations are people? But they're not. How do you, how do you make that even happen? The fact that they even passed that in the Supreme Court was so, it was evil. It was evil in its inception. We saw it and it happened, and we were just sitting back and thinking, wow, I don't know if anybody else did, but during the time I was alive when it happened, and I'm sitting there watching as they pass it, I'm like, hold on, what did they just say? I thought it was insane. What's crazy to me now is that people harp on the social issues more than they do on these issues that mean more. So, for example, those that are anti-LGBT, and I don't really like to make this about that, but those that are anti-LGBT or anti-trans would bring up the fact that this is replacing women. Trans people, trans men, trans women are trying to replace women and men. And I find that very ironic that they would go over and harp over this social issue and not realize that, well, honey, corporations replaced you as well. And you haven't made that much of a fuss about the corporation as people. And their money is no longer bribery, because it was considered bribery. Now it's considered free speech. We don't have the equivalent in the kind of funding that the corporations collectively do. So what we end up doing is basically they outmoney us, and corporations have more power than we collectively do. So then
Yeah,
that means they
those are good
outpower.
points. Unfortunately, I have somebody who's been waiting for quite some time. Savannah, you've brought up some really good points, so I appreciate your contribution to today's live. It was really good.
Oh, no problem at all.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, listen, an uphill climb at a bare minimum, right? So, but somebody said we have to limit the focus, narrow our focus on one or two key issues, organize, make the desired outcome clear, and then work towards using strategies and tactics that will hopefully put enough pressure that will overcome some of the things that are currently obstacles. That's kind of the only hope, right? Because the political system's so messed up. Okay, I do want to say one thing really quickly before we move on to our next guest. First of all, if you're new to my live stream, thanks for coming here. My name is Chip Barnes. I go live 6 days a week here on TikTok. Somebody asked me, what do you do for work? I do some trading on the financial markets a little bit here and there. I've done less of it over the last 10 weeks since I got started on social media. But I'm a veteran. I was in a tank unit on the front lines of the first Gulf War back in 1990. I served in Germany first, did a lot of training, stuff like that. I know exactly what combat is like. It's not pretty. It sucks. I learned about the Israel-Palestine issue quite by chance in my senior year in college, just before I went into the military. One of my classmates happened to talk about the first Intifada in a senior presentation that she did. And so I had preconceived notions, like many of us, about what the relationship to the United States, and I'd only heard one narrative, and it completely shattered that narrative. And I felt really badly for Palestinians because I didn't know. Just like many of us who just learned about it now probably feel the same way. The more you learn, the more you're like shaking your head like, damn. So that got me thinking about this issue, and I've just kind of kept a close eye on it for many, many years, read a lot of books. And then when the internet came about, I studied as much. It just fascinates me, and I feel badly for Palestinians, quite frankly. So, anybody who's marginalized, I feel badly for. So anyway, so I've been advocating for it pretty heavily, and thankfully I've grown an audience. I was really worried about coming on that no one would listen to me. I swear. I mean, it's the truth. Anyway, so the other thing I want to make mention of is after this next guest, I'm starting to split my live broadcast between my primary channel, which is Chip Barnes 67, the one that we're currently on, and my backup channel, which is Truth Seeker 670. So if you're not following me, it's a very simple way to do it. So you'll see the notice when it comes up. If you go to my link tree, which is a little link in my bio, which says Linktree Chip Barnes, it's below my description of, Truth Seeker, Animal Nature Lover, Peace Not War. And you'll see a link tree. If you click on that, it's going to take you to a list that at the very top, it says TikTok backup. Then you can follow it, and then you're going to be good to go. The reason I'm doing that is because when I ask people to follow my backup account, which, by the way, the reason that I do that, for those of you who don't know, 4 times during my 8-week brief period here, my account's been taken down for whatever reason. And I don't think I've done anything that's violated guidelines. I've just been talking about these issues the way I'm talking to you right now. And for whatever reason, it just keeps happening. So having a backup account is super important so that if we're doing business in one place, and of course that place gets taken away, we have another place to work together. That's what it does. I have about 105,000 followers here, and I have about 4,000 followers there. So that's why I want to encourage that to grow some. Okay, just to let you know my schedule, so you know what when I do this, because people seem to like it. It's Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 8 p.m. Eastern to 10 p.m. Eastern time. I'm probably going to move that an hour earlier as soon as I can get my act together. I am going through some crap with Gulf War syndrome. It's my life has become difficult with a lot of health headwinds mentally and physically, which is unfortunate, but it's nothing compared to what the people of Gaza or even other soldiers went through in the second Iraq war. So not a pity party, but just it's affecting my ability to kind of get shit done, basically. So every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, I go live just like today from 12 noon to about 2 p.m., sometimes a little longer. But I wanted to bring up this guest first. They've waited patiently if they're still here. Nope, they dropped off. So I'm glad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this live right now. All the recordings, just to let you know, if you can't take the next hour because you got to go back to work or whatever, all of my lives get recorded. TikTok records them. I download them. I'm in the process of putting them up on YouTube and Rumble. So if you know what Rumble is just another version of YouTube, different company. It has a little less what I call shenanigans. They don't deplatform people or censor content because of what they say. They kind of let it all go up, which is kind of cool. So if you go into my link tree, like I mentioned earlier, same thing, not just for the TikTok backup, but I have a Twitter account, which, by the way, is worth checking out just because I have a list on my pinned message at the very top of my timeline. I have a message that I pin that has all the people that I've followed over the years that I think are really great. I think you'd like them a lot too. If you like my objective kind of down the middle approach, similar people, many from whom I've learned much of what I'm sharing with you all. So I've like 35 or 40 names and a bunch of YouTube channels and some other stuff. So I'm also going to put together a reading list. Some people ask me about the books that I've read. I'm going to put together a reading list of all the books on Palestine that I've read. And then I'll put together another list for all the geopolitical stuff that I've gotten into. So I'm going to end this right now. Please come over to Truth Seeker 670 and we'll continue the conversation there. Okay. Thanks everybody. See you in a second or two.